They found her in a circle of scorched earth, 9 rogue bodies arranged like the points of a broken star around her feet. She was barefoot. Blood ran from a dozen shallow cuts across her arms and face, dark against skin gone pale with exhaustion. In her right hand, she held a cracked riverstone, the fracture line splitting it nearly in two. In her left, nothing. No weapon, no blade. Behind her, pressed against the collapsed wall of an abandoned barn, 7 wolf pups huddled in the shadows. The smallest, a boy no older than 3, clung to the hem of her torn dress with fingers gone white at the knuckles. The Alpha King's war column, 300 of the most lethal shifters on the North American continent, had ground to a complete halt at the forest's edge. Not because of the bodies. They had seen worse. Not because of the scorched earth, though the perfect circle of burned grass spoke of power none of them could name. They stopped because the girl, whoever she was, stood between them and the children, raised her chin, and met the Alpha King's gaze without flinching. "You will not touch them," she said. Her voice did not shake. Commander Lyra, seated on a steel-gray mare at the king's right hand, leaned forward in her saddle. Her wolf, normally disciplined to the point of invisibility, pressed against the surface of her skin with ears flat and tail low. Not aggression, submission. The ancient, involuntary response to the presence of something sacred. "My king," Lyra said quietly. "She has no wolf. I can smell the absence on her." Caden Blackwell, 34 years old, scarred by 3 border wars and 2 assassination attempts, crowned at an age when most wolves were still learning to control their shift, looked at the girl with the cracked stone and felt his world tilt on its axis. His wolf, the great and terrible beast that had not spoken unbidden in 11 years, lifted its head inside his chest and said one word. Mate, but that was later. That was the moment everything changed. 23 years earlier, the story had begun differently. Elara Thorne learned she was wolfless on her 16th birthday. Most wolves knew earlier. The shift came at 12, sometimes 13. Bones would crack in the night. Fur would ripple across skin like water, finding its course. Eyes would flash gold or silver in the moonlight, and the elders would gather to witness the cub's first transformation, to welcome another warrior into the pack's ranks. Elara's 16th birthday passed in silence. She woke in the supply shed where she had slept since her 14th year, when her mother had stopped meeting her eyes and her father had begun taking his meals alone. The shed smelled of damp burlap and mouse droppings in the particular sourness of a space where nothing had ever been loved. She pressed her palms flat against the earth floor the way the elders had taught her as a child. Waited for the low hum of an inner voice. Waited for the wolf. Nothing came. By noon, the pack had a name for her. Hollow. It was worse than wolfless. Wolfless meant incomplete, a puzzle with a missing piece that might someday be found. Hollow meant empty. A vessel with nothing inside worth keeping. A body the goddess had looked at and decided to pass over. Alpha Magnus Hale made it official at the autumn gathering, standing on the stone platform at the center of Thornridge territory with 600 wolves assembled before him. He was enormous, 6'4" broad through the chest and shoulders, with pale gray eyes that held the flat, assessing quality of a predator, deciding whether something was food or furniture. "No wolf, no place," he said. His voice carried across the clearing without effort. "The goddess does not make mistakes, she makes warnings." The pack laughed. Elara, standing at the very back of the assembly, because that was where the hollow belonged, did not laugh. She was learning even then that survival had nothing to do with the noise you made and everything to do with the silence you kept. She moved into the supply shed permanently the next day. It was a narrow structure behind the pack's grain store, barely 8 feet long and 5 feet wide, with a dirt floor and walls that let in the wind. She slept on a pile of empty grain sacks. She ate what the kitchens discarded: bruised apples, the heels of bread loaves, soup bones with a ghost of marrow still clinging to them. She worked without being asked, mended fences, hauled water from the creek, scrubbed blood from the fighting pit after training sessions. The wolves treated her the way one treats a stray dog, occasionally useful, mostly invisible, always beneath notice. The only possession she kept was a riverstone. She found it the day after Magnus's speech, lying at the bottom of the creek that marked Thornridge's southern boundary. It was smooth and pale gray, small enough to fit inside her closed fist. When she picked it up, it was warm. Inexplicably, impossibly warm, as though it had been sitting in someone's palm for hours. She carried it everywhere after that, not because she believed it was magical, because it was the only thing in the world that had ever felt like it wanted to be held by her. At night, alone in the supply shed with the wind whistling through gaps in the walls, she would press the stone against her sternum and whisper to the wolf she did not have, "If you're in there, I'll wait." The wolf never answered. But something else stirred, something Elara could not name. A sharpness behind her ribs, a low vibration that tightened her skin when danger was near. She could smell storms 2 days before they arrived. She could hear the change in a heartbeat when someone lied. She could feel in a way that bypassed language entirely when a living creature was in pain. She told no one. In Thornridge, the wolfless did not get gifts. They got punishments. And so Alara carried her stone and her silence and her invisible sense of something not quite wolf through 23 years of a life that no one, least of all Alara herself, believed was worth the breath it took to sustain. She was wrong. The goddess does not make mistakes. But sometimes she hides her greatest weapons in the bodies the world is too proud to look at twice. The year Alara turned 23, she made a discovery that changed the trajectory of her survival. It happened on a cold afternoon in early spring when the wind still carried the bite of winter, and the pack's enforcers were occupied with a border dispute 3 miles north. Alara had been hauling firewood to the main lodge, a task that took her past the Alpha's residence, a low stone building with narrow windows and a door that was always guarded. The door was not guarded that afternoon. Alara did not plan to go inside. She had survived 23 years by being invisible. And invisible, people did not walk into the Alpha's residence uninvited. But as she passed the entrance, a gust of wind caught the door and sent a single sheet of paper tumbling out into the dirt. It landed at her feet. Alara looked around. The compound was empty. She bent, picked up the paper, and looked at it. It was a ledger page. Columns of numbers, dates, names. At the top, written in Alpha Magnus's distinctive slashing script, were the words Wolfless Labor Output, Q1 Annual Revenue. Alara's hands went cold. She read the page twice, then a third time, her pulse beating hard in her throat. The numbers were staggering, $4.2 million. That was the annual profit generated across Thornridge and 5 allied territories by the unpaid labor of Wolfless Pack members. The document listed specific revenue streams: mining operations, textile production, agricultural work, infrastructure, maintenance. Beside each line item was a name. Some of them Alara recognized. Most of them, she realized with a sinking horror, she did not recognize because those wolves were already dead. At the bottom of the page in smaller script was a note: Council consensus: maintain current exploitation model. Increase acquisition of weak bloodlines for labor expansion. Council. Alara folded the paper carefully and slid it into the waistband of her skirt. Her hands were shaking. Her unnamed sense, the thing that lived behind her ribs, was screaming. She understood in that moment 3 things with perfect clarity. 1, she was not worthless. She was profitable. They had built an economy on her back and the backs of every wolfless wolf in 6 territories. 2, they would never let her go. You did not release assets that generated $4.2 million a year. 3, if she was going to survive, she needed to disappear. And disappearing required preparation. That night alone in the supply shed with the wind howling through the gaps in the walls, Alara began to plan. It took 7 years. 7 years of stealing moments. Of learning skills in the spaces between tasks, in the hours when the pack slept and the compound was silent. Of preparing for a future she could not yet see, but knew with bone-deep certainty was the only alternative to dying in the supply shed, with her name on a ledger page and her body in an unmarked grave. She started with the radio. It was an old shortwave unit discarded in the back of the equipment shed because the antenna was broken and the battery terminals were corroded. Alara fixed the antenna with wire salvaged from a fence. She cleaned the terminals with vinegar and ash. At night, when the pack was asleep, she would tune the dial to the weather channels and listen. She learned to recognize the patterns: high-pressure systems moving in from the west, low-pressure troughs sliding down from Canada, the particular quality of the wind that meant snow was coming, or rain, or the kind of cold that could kill an unprepared traveler in 6 hours. She learned to predict storms 72 hours in advance. She learned meteorology the way some people learn prayer, as though her life depended on it, because it did. Next, she learned cartography. There was a set of surveyor's tools in the Alpha's office left behind by a previous pack leader who had used them to map territorial boundaries. Alara borrowed them. Borrowed was a generous word. She took them in the dead of night and returned them before dawn. She spent 3 years mapping the southern borderlands. 15 different routes through the wilderness, each one carefully drawn on sheets of paper she hid beneath the floorboards of the supply shed. She noted water sources, defensible positions, shelters, obstacles. She marked rogue territories and safe zones, and the places where the forest was so dense that even wolves with night vision would struggle to track. Escape Route 7 was her favorite. It followed the creek for 2 miles, then cut east through a narrow canyon that most wolves avoided because the footing was treacherous. It emerged at an abandoned barn near the edge of Allied territory, a structure she had scouted personally and confirmed was far enough from regular patrols to offer temporary refuge. She memorized all 15 routes, burned the maps. The knowledge lived in her head, now safer than any piece of paper. Then she learned field medicine. The pack healer was an old wolf named Marin, who kept her texts in a locked cabinet in the infirmary. Alara picked the lock with a bent nail. She read the text by candlelight, copied the important sections onto scraps of paper, and returned the books before Marin noticed they were missing. She learned the names of 47 medicinal plants that grew in the Montana wilderness. Yarrow for bleeding, willow bark for pain, comfrey for broken bones. She learned how to set a fracture, how to clean a wound, how to recognize the early signs of infection, and treat them before they turned lethal. She practiced on herself. Small cuts deliberately made so she could learn the feel of stitching skin. Burns from the cook fire so she could learn which plants drew out the heat and which ones made it worse. By the time she was 23, Alara Thorne could survive alone in the wilderness for weeks. She could navigate by stars and by the shape of the land. She could predict weather, treat injuries, find water, build fire in wet conditions. And there was one more thing, a thing she had discovered by accident and did not fully understand. She could make wolves stop. It happened the first time when she was 19. A pack dog, a massive brindled creature with a mean streak, had cornered her near the grain store. It was growling, hackles raised, teeth bared. Alara, backed against the wall with nowhere to go, had opened her mouth and said in a voice that came from somewhere deeper than her throat, "Stop." The dog stopped, not reluctantly, not slowly. It stopped mid-snarl as though someone had cut the strings holding it upright. It sat. It looked at her with something that might have been confusion or might have been fear. She tried it again a week later on a different dog, same result. She did not try it on wolves. She was not that brave. But she practiced the voice when she was alone, learned to summon it at will, learned the exact tone, the exact pitch that made the command undeniable. She did not know what it was. She did not know why it worked, but she knew the way she knew how to predict storms that it would save her life someday. At night, alone in the supply shed, she would press the river stone against her chest and whisper, "If you're listening, thank you." The stone pulsed against her chest, a living heartbeat. The pups arrived on a night thick with the scent of iron and smoke. Alara heard them before she saw them. 7 distinct heartbeats, rapid and irregular, tangled with the high keening whine that wolf pups make when they are too frightened to howl. The sound cut through the supply shed wall like a blade. She was on her feet before she was fully awake, the river stone already in her hand, the unnamed scents behind her ribs screaming. She found them a quarter-mile south, huddled inside the remains of an old lambing barn that had been abandoned when the border shifted 3 years earlier. The roof had half collapsed. The walls leaned inward like tired old men. Inside, 7 pups, none older than 5, lay pressed against one another in a tangle of matted fur and trembling limbs. 3 were in wolf form, tiny bodies shaking so hard their teeth chattered. 4 were in human form, naked, covered in soot and dried blood that was not their own. The smallest, a girl with enormous dark eyes and a gash across her left shoulder, looked up at Alara and said one word, "Please." Alara's unnamed sense surged. She could feel their terror like a physical substance, thick and acidic, coating the inside of her throat. She could feel the gash on the girl's shoulder as though it were carved into her own skin. And beneath it all, beneath the fear and the pain and the smoke, she could feel something else. The fading warmth of adult wolves who had died protecting these children. Parents, guardians. A small pack obliterated. She knelt. She did not think about what the pack would say. She did not think about Alpha Magnus's rules, which forbade harboring outside wolves without formal petition. She thought only of the smallest girl's eyes and the words she had spoken, and the way the river stone in Alara's palm had gone suddenly blazingly hot. "I'm here," she whispered. "You're safe now." She worked through the night. She carried water from the creek in a cracked bucket, 20 trips back and forth, each one a half-mile round. She tore strips from her own shirt to bind the girl's shoulder wound and a deep puncture on a boy's thigh. She gathered the driest straw she could find and built a nest in the barn's one intact corner. She hummed, not a lullaby exactly, but a low, steady vibration from somewhere deep in her chest that made the pups shaking gradually slow. By dawn, all 7 were asleep. Alara sat against the barn wall with her knees drawn up and the stone pressed to her chest. Her hands were stained with blood. Her back ached from carrying water. Her shirt was in ribbons. And she was more certain than she had ever been in her life that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She also knew with the cold clarity of someone who had survived Thornridge for 23 years that if Alpha Magnus found out, he would kill the pups. Not out of cruelty necessarily, though cruelty came easily to him. Out of principle. Outside wolves were a threat. Wolfless women did not make decisions. And mercy in Magnus Hale's pack was a luxury reserved exclusively for those strong enough to enforce it. Alara was not strong, but she had a barn and 7 pups and a riverstone that burned against her skin like a second heartbeat. For the first time in her life, that was enough. She kept them hidden for 11 days. It was, in retrospect, a miracle it lasted that long. Alara rose before the pack, each morning stole what food she could without being noticed. Half a loaf here, a handful of dried venison. Their milk skimmed from the top of the churns before the kitchen staff arrived and carried it south to the barn. She cleaned wounds. She sang her humming songs. She learned their names. The smallest girl was Briar. She was 4 years old and the gash on her shoulder was healing cleanly under Alara's care. She had a way of looking at Alara that made the world feel both heavier and lighter, at the same time as though Briar could see straight through to the hollow place inside her and had decided it did not matter. The boy with the punctured thigh was Lysander. He was serious and watchful with dark hair that fell into his eyes. He limped for the first week, but by day 8, he was walking without favoring the leg, and by day 10, he was following Alara everywhere, asking questions in a soft voice about the plants she used and the way she wrapped bandages. The others were Elowin, Caspian, Beck, Sage, and Ash. Elowin was 5 with a sharp tongue and a sharper mind. Caspian was 4, shy and sweet, with a smile that appeared so rarely it felt like a gift when it did. Beck was 5, Sage 4, inseparable, always whispering to each other in a language that seemed to consist entirely of glances and half-finished sentences. And Ash. Ash was 3 years old. He had not spoken a single word since Alara found them. He followed her everywhere, pressed his small body against her leg like a shadow that had learned to love, and watched the world with eyes that were too old for his face. The pups began to heal. The 3 who had been stuck in wolf form shifted back on the 5th day, exhausted but whole. Briar's shoulder wound closed cleanly. Lysander walked without limping. And Ash, silent, wide-eyed, Ash began to press closer to Alara in the moments when she sat still, as though proximity alone could fill the space where words should be. On the 10th night, Alara sat with her back against the barn wall and all 7 pups asleep in the straw nest and felt something shift inside her chest. Not the unnamed sense, something softer, something that felt dangerously close to hope. She pressed the river stone to her lips and whispered, "Thank you." The stone thrummed with steady heat against her mouth. On the 11th morning, Alara returned from the creek to find Alpha Magnus Hale standing in the barn doorway. He was not alone. Beta Silas Crane stood at his right shoulder, a tall, lean wolf with a face like a hatchet and eyes that missed nothing. 4 enforcers flanked them, broad-shouldered males who filled the barn entrance like a wall of muscle and contempt. Alara froze. The bucket of water she was carrying slipped from her hands and hit the ground, sloshing cold across her bare feet. Behind her, inside the barn, she heard Briar's sharp intake of breath, heard Lysander whisper, "Alara." Magnus stepped forward. The air pressure in the barn changed, thickened. His alpha aura expanded like a physical thing pressing down on everything it touched. Behind Alara, the pups whimpered. Ash buried his face in her calf. 11 days, Magnus said. His voice was quiet. That was worse than shouting. You've been stealing pack resources for 11 days to feed strays. Alara's throat closed. She stepped in front of the pups instinctively, her body between them and the alpha's gaze. The river stone in her pocket pulsed with heat so intense it should have burned through the fabric of her skirt. "They're children," she said. Her voice came out steady. She did not know how. "Their pack was destroyed. They had nowhere. They are not our concern." Magnus stepped closer. The enforcers moved with him, a coordinated advance that left no room for escape. "Pack law is clear," Magnus continued. "Outside wolves require formal petition. Housing them without permission is a violation of sovereignty. Feeding them with our food is theft. They would have died. Then they would have died." He said it without malice, which made it worse. It was simply a fact to him. The way gravity is a fact. The weak fall, the strong decide. "You are wolfless, Alara." Magnus's pale gray eyes settled on her like a weight. "You have no standing to make this decision. You have no standing to make any decision." He turned to Silas. "Remove the strays, take them to the southern border, and leave them. They're children." The words tore from Alara's throat with a force that surprised even her. The humming vibration in her chest, the thing she had carried for 23 years, without naming, expanded, pressed outward against her ribs, and for one disorienting instant, the air in the barn seemed to shimmer. The enforcers hesitated. Magnus noticed. His gray eyes narrowed. "That," he said softly, "is not a wolf I'm sensing, but it is something." He studied her the way one studies an insect pinned under glass. Interesting. Irrelevant. "Silas, proceed." Alara's mistake was not hiding the pups. Her mistake was what she did next. She stepped forward, placed her hand flat against Alpha Magnus Hale's chest and pushed. It should have been nothing. She was 5'6", 120 pounds, wolfless, malnourished. He was an alpha wolf in his prime 6'4", 230 pounds of muscle and bone and concentrated fury. He stumbled back 3 full steps. The barn went silent. Magnus looked down at his chest where her hand had been, looked at the 3 steps he'd been forced back. Then his expression shifted, surprise crystallizing into cold calculation. He smiled. It was not a kind smile. "You just gave me legal grounds for execution," he said quietly. "Striking an alpha is treason. But I think exile will be more instructive." He stepped back, still smiling. "Exile, effective immediately. Take the strays with you. If any of you are found within Thornridge territory after sunset, I will consider it an act of war." He turned and walked away. The enforcers followed. Silas lingered long enough to give Alara a look that might have been pity or might have been fear. Then the barn door swung shut, and they were gone. Alara stood motionless, her hand still raised, the riverstone burning against her thigh like a coal that refused to burn. Behind her, Briar whispered, "What do we do now?" Alara closed her eyes. She had no wolf, no pack, no home. She had 7 orphan pups and a wilderness full of rogues between her and anything resembling safety. She opened her eyes, picked up Ash, took Briar's hand. "We walk," she said. They left Thornridge as the first light bled through the eastern canopy. A thin gray dawn that smelled of frost and wood smoke, and the particular sourness of a place that had never wanted her. Alara carried Ash on her hip and the skinning knife at her belt, and the riverstone in her pocket, like a coal that refused to burn. Briar walked beside her, jaw set, eyes forward, radiating the fierce dignity of a child who has decided that falling apart is not an option. Lysander limped but did not complain. Elwyn held Caspian's hand. Beck and Sage followed in a ragged line, silent, trusting their small faces turned toward a woman who had nothing to offer them, except her presence and the stubborn, inexplicable certainty that presence was enough. Behind them, the gates of Thornridge swung shut. The sound was heavy, final, like the closing of a book. No one came to see them off. No one called out. The pack that had tolerated Alara for 23 years erased her in a single morning, and the silence of their indifference was louder than any condemnation Magnus could have spoken. Alara did not look back. She had spent her whole life looking back, at what she lacked, at what she couldn't be, at the wolf-shaped absence that defined her in the eyes of everyone she had ever known. She was done. Whatever waited in the southern wilderness, rogue starvation, death, it waited ahead. And ahead, at least, was a direction she had chosen for herself. The riverstone pulsed in her pocket, patient, knowing, as though it understood something she didn't, as though it had always known. They followed Escape Route 7. Alara had memorized it years ago during the long nights in the supply shed when planning for a future she could not see was the only thing that kept her breathing. The route followed the creek for 2 miles, then cut east through a narrow canyon where the footing was treacherous but the cover was good. The pups were exhausted by midday. Ash fell asleep on Alara's shoulder. Briar stumbled twice, caught herself, kept walking. Lysander's limp returned. They stopped to rest beside the creek. Alara passed out the last of the bread she had managed to take before exile. Half a loaf divided 7 ways. It was not enough. It would never be enough. But they ate and they drank from the creek, and when Caspian asked, "How far?" Alara said, "Far enough." By nightfall, they reached the barn. It was exactly where Alara remembered it. A quarter mile off the main route, hidden in a stand of pines, the structure leaning but still standing. The roof had holes. The door hung crooked on its hinges, but it had walls and it was empty, and it was far enough from Thornridge that the patrols would not find them tonight. Alara settled the pups inside, built a nest from dry grass and pine needles, and sat with her back against the wall while they fell asleep one by one. Ash curled against her side, his small hand fisted in the fabric of her dress. The riverstone in her pocket was so hot it should have burned. It didn't. The heat traveled up her ribs, across her chest, settled in the place behind her sternum, where the unnamed thing lived. Alara closed her eyes and listened to 7 small heartbeats, steady and safe, and thought, this is what I was made for. She did not sleep. She could smell the storm coming. 72 hours out, maybe less. The wind had shifted. The air had that peculiar density that meant snow was on its way, heavy and fast. And beneath the smell of the storm, faint but unmistakable, she smelled something else. Rogues. The scent was rank, unwashed, layered over something sharper. Adrenaline, bloodlust, the chemical signature of wolves who had been feral long enough to lose the boundary between hunting and killing. Alara's unnamed sense lit up like a signal fire. 12 heartbeats, surrounding the barn, closing in. She stood slowly, careful not to wake the pups, slid the skinning knife from her belt. It was old, the blade pitted with rust, the handle wrapped in fraying leather. It was the only weapon she had. The river stone in her other hand was so hot it glowed faintly in the dark. Alara stepped outside. 12 rogues emerged from the tree line. They were thin and scarred and feral-eyed, and they moved with the boneless, predatory economy of wolves who had forgotten how to be human. The largest, a massive gray-furred male with a torn ear and yellow teeth, shifted to human form and grinned at her. "Wolfless," he said, his nostrils flared. "We can smell the nothing on you." His grin widened. "We can also smell the pups, 7 of them. Good eating if nothing else." Alara's hand found the knife. The river stone in her other hand was so hot it should have blistered her skin. It didn't. Instead, the heat traveled up her arm, across her chest, down into the deep place behind her ribs, where the unnamed vibration lived. And for the first time in 23 years, the vibration answered. Not with a wolf. Not with the crack of bones and the surge of fur that she had spent her childhood praying for. It answered with something older. The air around Alara changed. It thickened, pressurized, took on a luminous quality like moonlight condensed into vapor. Her eyes, her ordinary brown eyes, flickered silver. Not wolf silver, deeper. The silver of starlight reflected on still water. The silver of the goddess's own gaze. The rogue leader's grin evaporated. He took a step back. "That's impossible," he breathed. "You're wolfless. You can't—" Alara did not let him finish. She moved. Later, when the Alpha King's scouts would reconstruct the scene from the evidence left behind, they would struggle to believe what the tracks and the blood patterns told them. A single individual, barefoot, armed with a rusted knife, had engaged 12 feral rogues in close combat and killed 9 of them. The other 3 had fled. The killing had been efficient, almost surgical. Each strike guided by an instinct that bypassed training entirely and operated on something more fundamental. The silver light had scorched the grass in a perfect circle around the barn entrance. Nothing had gotten past her. Alara did not remember most of it. What she remembered was the feeling. A vast, calm, luminous presence moving through her body like a river, finding its course for the first time. She remembered the stone in her fist, blazing white. She remembered Briar's voice behind her chanting, "Please, please, please," like an incantation. She remembered the last rogue, a young male barely more than a boy who had fallen at her feet with a wound in his side that she had put there. He was still breathing. She stood over him, the knife in her hand, the silver light pouring off her skin, and she whispered, "You will not touch them." She did not kill him. She couldn't. Even in the heat of whatever she had become, she could not bring herself to kill someone who had stopped fighting. The rogue crawled away into the dark. Alara stood in the scorched circle, breathing hard, the silver light fading from her skin. Blood ran from a dozen small wounds she hadn't felt receiving. Her bare feet were cut to ribbons. The river stone in her hand had cracked down the middle, a clean fracture as though something inside it had finally been released. She turned. 7 pairs of eyes stared at her from the barn doorway. Briar, Lysander, Elowin, Caspian, Beck, Sage, Ash. Ash spoke his first word. "Mama," he said. Alara sat down in the scorched grass and wept. The scent hit Caden Blackwell 3 miles before he saw the clearing. Silver light, lunar energy, old blood. His wolf, silent for 11 years except in moments of rage, stirred with something that felt almost like recognition. Not the feral hunger that came with the curse, something else. Something that made his hands tighten on the reins and his breath catch in his throat. Commander Lyra noticed. She always did. "My king," she said quietly, her wolf pressing against her skin with ears flat. "You smell that lunar energy," Caden said. His voice betrayed nothing. Inside, his wolf whispered a word he had stopped believing in years ago. "Mate." "And blood," Lyra added. Her golden eyes narrowed. "Rogue blood, a lot of it." They followed the scent a half-mile off the road and emerged from the tree line into a clearing that stopped the entire war column dead. Caden saw the bodies first. 9 rogues arranged in a pattern that spoke of controlled devastation. Then the scorched earth, lunar channeling, something he'd only read about in texts older than his bloodline. Then her, small, barefoot, holding a cracked stone in one hand, a rusted knife in the other. Standing between his army and 7 pups like she could stop the world with will alone. His wolf surged, and for the first time since the silver poisoning 11 years ago, the surge felt like recognition instead of rage. As Caden crossed the clearing, moving slowly, hands visible and empty, he felt it. The thing that lived inside him, the curse he had carried for 11 years, the silver poisoning that his father's assassins had given him, and that no healer had ever been able to fully purge. It stirred, the feral edge that lived just beneath his skin, the thing that turned him into a mindless killing machine. Without warning, his beast that had nearly destroyed him a dozen times began to rise. His vision flickered. Red bled into the edges. His wolf, instead of the controlled, disciplined predator he had spent decades mastering, began to claw its way forward with teeth bared and reason abandoned. Caden stopped walking. 20 feet from the girl, he stopped because if he took another step, he would shift. And if he shifted now with the feral curse rising, he would kill everyone in this clearing, including her, including his mate. Commander Lyra's voice cut through the red haze. "My king, step back." The curse, Caden tried. He could not move, his muscles locked. His wolf was coming and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The girl with the cracked stone took one look at him and understood. She did not run, she did not scream. She stepped forward, raised her chin, and in a voice that came from somewhere deeper than her throat said one word: "Stop." The command hit Caden like a physical blow. His wolf mid-surge went absolutely still, not reluctantly, not slowly. It stopped the way a candle flame stops when you cover it with glass. Instant, complete, as though the girl's voice had reached inside his chest, wrapped around the feral thing trying to claw its way out and said no. Not today. Caden stood, frozen breath coming hard, every muscle in his body locked in place. The red faded from his vision. The wolf impossibly settled. He stared at the girl. She stared back. Behind her, the smallest pup, a boy no older than 3, whispered, "Mama." The girl did not take her eyes off Caden. "It's all right, Ash. Stay there." Commander Lyra dismounted, her hand on her sword. "My king," Caden raised one hand. "Stop." His voice, when he found it, was rough. "How did you do that?" The girl's grip on the knife tightened. "Do what?" "My wolf." Caden took a breath. His heart was still racing. "Only an alpha command works on the feral curse. But you have no wolf." "I don't know what I did." Her voice was steady, but Caden could see the exhaustion in the set of her shoulders, the way she swayed slightly on her bare, bloodied feet. "I just told you to stop." "And I did." Silence. The entire column stood motionless at the tree line, staring at a barefoot girl with a cracked stone who had just done something that should have been impossible. Lyra moved closer, her wolf pressing forward, ears flat, tail low. Not aggression, submission. The ancient, involuntary response to the presence of something sacred. "Lunarisma," Lyra breathed. "Goddess above. She's Lunarisma." Caden did not take his eyes off the girl. Who did this? He meant the rogues. He meant the scars. He meant all of it. The girl's knife hand trembled. "I did." The silence that followed was not the silence of an empty room. It was the silence of 300 predators recalibrating their understanding of the world. Caden could feel it ripple through the column behind him, the disbelief, the awe, the instinctive recognition that something fundamental had shifted. Warriors who had faced down siege lines and silver-tipped arrows stood motionless, and none of them, not one, doubted her. Caden looked at the cracked stone in her hand. It pulsed faintly with residual warmth. Not lunar energy exactly, but something gentler. A recognition. His wolf spoke again. Not the frantic pulse of before, but something reverent, almost awed. "She is ours. She has always been ours." Caden had learned over 34 years of living and 11 years of ruling to trust very little. He trusted strength. He trusted competence. He trusted the evidence of his own eyes. He looked at the girl, at the 9 dead rogues, at the scorched circle, at the 7 pups behind her alive because she had made it so. He trusted this. "You need to put the knife down," he said. Not a command, a request. "You're safe now. I swear it on my crown and my blood." The girl stared at him. Every alpha she had ever known had lied. Caden could see it in her eyes, the learned certainty that power was a weapon and promises were traps. But the riverstone in her hand pulsed, and something in Caden's voice or his face or the way he had stopped walking when the curse rose instead of forcing himself forward made her hesitate. She lowered the knife. Behind her, the small boy pressed harder against the doorframe and whispered again, "Mama." Caden's eyes went to the child. Something cracked in his expression. Not weakness, but the fracture line where strength meets tenderness. "Come with me," he said, "all of you." The girl did not move. "Where Ashcroft's stronghold? 3 days north. You'll have food, shelter, healers." He paused. "Safety." "I don't know you." "No," Caden agreed. "But you stopped my wolf. That means something." "What does it mean?" Caden looked at her, at the hollow exhaustion in her face, at the way she stood between his army and 7 children with nothing but a rusted knife and a will made of iron. "It means," he said quietly, "that you're the first person in 11 years who's been able to do that. And if you can control the curse, then maybe—" He stopped, started again. "I'm asking, not commanding. Will you come?" The girl was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "What's your name?" "Caden Blackwell." "The Alpha King." Yes, she looked at him, then at the column of warriors, then at the 7 pups behind her. My name is Alara Thorne, she said. These are my children. Not the pups she had found, not the strays she was protecting. My children. Caden inclined his head. Alara Thorne, will you and your children accept my protection? Alara looked down at the cracked riverstone in her hand. The two halves were still connected by the thinnest line of stone, held together by something more fragile than physics. She looked up. Yes, she said. The journey to Ashcroft's stronghold took 3 days. Caden offered Alara a horse. She refused. The pups rode in the supply wagon nested in blankets that smelled of pine and leather, and Alara walked beside them with her hand on the wagon's edge, as though letting them out of arm's reach would undo everything she had fought for. Caden walked with her. He did not have to. He was the Alpha King. He could have ridden at the head of the column, left her to the supply train, arrived at the stronghold days ahead, and sent word when she was permitted to enter. He walked beside her instead. They did not speak much the first day. Alara was too exhausted, and Caden was too occupied with the careful management of his wolf, which had not stopped whispering mate since the moment he had seen her. But on the second day, as they followed a narrow trail through dense pine forest, Caden said, "May I ask you something?" Alara glanced at him. "Yes. What pack are you from, Thornridge?" Caden knew Thornridge, a mid-sized territory in the southern Montana wilderness ruled by Alpha Magnus Hale. Traditionalist, isolationist, not particularly powerful, but old blood, old ways, old pride. "Magnus exiled you," Caden said. It was not a question. "How did you know?" "Because if he had recognized what you are, he would never have let you go." Alara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What am I, Wamam?" "Lunarisma, soul of the moon, a gift the goddess bestows maybe once in 1,000 years." Caden looked at her. "You don't know, do you?" "I know I have no wolf." "Lunarisma isn't a wolf gift. It's a goddess gift. It doesn't require a wolf. It requires a soul pure enough to channel the moon itself." He paused. "You channel lunar energy through empathy, through love. It's activated by the need to protect what cannot protect itself." Alara looked at the wagon where 7 small faces peered out at her from beneath the blankets. "I didn't know," she said quietly. I couldn't let them die." "And that," Caden said, "is why the goddess chose you." They walked in silence for a while. Then Alara said, "You have a curse." "Yes." "What happened?" Caden had not told this story to anyone outside his inner circle in 11 years. But there was something about walking beside this small, fierce woman with the cracked stone and the 7 adopted children that made the truth feel less like a weakness and more like a fact. "My father was poisoned," he said. "Silver mixed into his wine over the course of months. By the time we realized it was too late, the silver doesn't kill immediately. It seeps into the wolf, into the bond between human and beast, and it corrodes. Slowly, until the wolf goes silent." He paused. "My father spent the last 6 months of his life wolfless, fully human, dying in pieces." Alara's hand tightened on the wagon edge. "I was 19, Caden continued. "I drank from the same wine at the same table for 6 months before we found out. I didn't get as much as he did, but I got enough. The healers purged most of it, but not all. What's left? It doesn't kill my wolf. It makes it feral, unpredictable. I can go weeks without an episode, then something triggers it, and the wolf comes without reason or control." "That's what was happening in the clearing," Alara said. "Yes, and I stopped it." "You did?" Alara looked at him. "How?" "I don't know," Caden said honestly, "but I'd like to find out." That night, they camped in a clearing beside a fast-running stream. The warriors set up a perimeter. The pups, fed and warm for the first time in weeks, fell asleep in the wagon almost immediately. Alara sat by the fire, her back against a log, the cracked river stone turning between her fingers. Caden approached with 2 bowls of stew and a question in his eyes. "May I sit?" Alara looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. Caden sat, handed her a bowl. She took it, and for the first time in 3 days, he saw her hands shake. "You're safe," he said quietly. "You can rest." "I don't know how," Alara said. "I've been running for so long, I don't remember what it feels like to stop." Caden understood that. He had been running since he was 19. From the throne, from the curse, from the certainty that the only way to survive ruling was to never let anyone close enough to hurt you. And yet here he sat beside a woman he had known for 3 days, and the wolf inside him was quiet for the first time in 11 years. "The healers at Ashcroft will look at the children," Caden said. "Make sure they're healthy. And you?" "I'm fine. You have a dozen open wounds on your feet, and you haven't slept in 3 days." Alara looked down at her feet as though noticing the blood for the first time. "I'll heal. You don't have to do this alone anymore." She looked at him. I don't know how to not do it alone. Caden set his bowl down. Then let me teach you. Alara's throat worked. She looked away into the fire, and Caden saw the exhaustion in every line of her body. The bone-deep weariness of someone who had been holding the world together with nothing but will and had finally reached the end of what will could carry. Why, she asked. Why would you do that? Caden could have said, because you're my mate. Because the bond is pulling me toward you like gravity. Because my wolf recognized you before I did, and wolves do not lie about these things. But he looked at her, at the cracked stone in her hands, at the way she held herself like a weapon, even when she was sitting still, and he told her the truth. Because in 34 years of living, you have never met anyone who stopped my wolf by asking it to. And if there's a chance you can do it again, if there's a chance the curse can be controlled. He paused. I've been dying slowly for 11 years. You might be the reason I don't. Alara stared at him. You're not asking me to stay because I'm useful. I'm asking you to stay because you saved my life in that clearing, and I'd like the chance to return the favor. She was quiet for a long time. The fire crackled. The stream rushed. Somewhere in the distance, a nightbird called. I'll stay, Alara said finally. For now. Caden inclined his head. For now is enough. They reached Ashcroft's stronghold on the evening of the third day. It was built into the side of a mountain, a fortress of stone and iron, and centuries of accumulated power. The walls rose 40 feet high, the gates were reinforced steel, and the warriors who manned the battlements could put an arrow through a target at 300 yards in full dark. Alara, walking beside the wagon with the pups peering out at the massive structure, felt very small. Caden stopped at the gates and turned to her. This is home, he said, for as long as you want it to be. The gates opened. Inside the stronghold was a city, barracks and training grounds and armories, markets and residences and gardens. Wolves everywhere, hundreds of them, warriors and civilians alike, all of them stopping to stare as the Alpha King walked through with a barefoot woman and 7 pups in a wagon. Caden led them to the main residence, a low stone building with wide windows and a door that opened into a great hall lined with weapons and banners. He gestured to Commander Lyra, who had been riding at the rear of the column. Take the children to the guest quarters. Hot baths, food, clean clothes, and fetch the healers. Lyra nodded. She approached the wagon, gently crouched down to the pup's level, and said in a voice Alara had not heard her use before, soft and warm, Come on, little ones, let's get you cleaned up. The pups looked at Alara. She nodded. It's all right. Go with her. They climbed out of the wagon one by one. Briar held Ash's hand. Lysander walked beside Elowen. Caspian, Beck, and Sage followed in a tight cluster. Among Briar's meager belongings, a torn blanket, a wooden doll with one arm. The healers would later find a small locked box. She would not let them touch it. When Alara asked, Briar only said, Mama gave it to me, before. Alara did not press. Some wounds needed time. Ash looked back at Alara. You'll come. I'll come, Alara promised. I just need to talk to the king first. Ash nodded. Lyra led them away, and Alara watched until they disappeared around a corner. When she turned back, Caden was watching her. You're terrified, he said. Yes. Of what? That this is temporary. That you'll realize I'm not whatever you think I am. That you'll send us away. Caden stepped closer, not crowding, but close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. I won't, he said. And before you say you don't believe me, I'll prove it. Hauteo, give me time. The healers confirmed what Alara already knew. The pups were malnourished but otherwise healthy. No infections, no permanent damage. A week of good food and rest, and they would be fine. Alara was a different story. The head healer, an elderly female wolf named Marin with silver hair and sharp green eyes, took one look at Alara's feet and made a sound of pure disgust. Sit, she commanded. Alara sat. Marin cleaned the wounds of polite salve, wrapped them in clean bandages, and then looked at the rest of her. The scars on her arms, the 2 prominent ribs, the way her hands shook when she thought no one was looking. When did you last eat a full meal? Marin asked. I don't remember. Sleep a full night? Years. Marin made another disgusted sound. The king wants you healthy. I want you healthy. So you're going to eat and sleep and let me take care of you until you stop looking like a strong wind could break you in half. Understood. Alara, for the first time in 3 days, smiled. Understood. The first week passed in a blur. The pups thrived. They were given a suite of rooms in the guest wing, large and warm, and filled with soft beds and toys and more food than they knew what to do with. Briar appointed herself the leader and organized the others into a rotating schedule of baths and meals and supervised playtime. Lysander followed Alara everywhere, asking questions. Ash did not leave her side unless she explicitly told him to. Alara, for her part, did not know what to do with safety. She woke every morning in a soft bed in a room with a door that locked from the inside, and her first instinct was to check the exits. She ate meals in a dining hall with warriors who nodded to her respectfully, and her hands shook every time someone approached too quickly. Caden noticed. He began sitting with her at meals, not talking, just present, a steady, quiet presence that asked for nothing and offered everything. On the fourth night, he found her in the garden, sitting on a stone wall with the cracked river stone in her hands and the moon overhead. "May I join you?" he asked. Alara nodded. Caden sat beside her, careful to leave space between them, and looked up at the moon. "My father used to bring me here," he said after a while. "When I was young, before the crown, before the poison, he'd sit right here and tell me that ruling wasn't about being the strongest. It was about being the one people trusted to make the hard choices." "Do you believe that?" Alara asked. "I didn't, not for a long time." Caden looked at her. "But then I met a woman who stood between an army and 7 children with nothing but a rusted knife, and I started to think maybe he was right." Alara's fingers tightened on the stone. "I'm not strong. You're the strongest person I've ever met. I have no wolf. You have something better." Alara turned to look at him. "What? You have the goddess's blessing. You have 7 children who would die for you. And you have—" He stopped, started again. "You have the ability to stop my wolf with a word. Do you know what that means?" "No, Izaki. It means you're the only thing standing between me and going fully feral. The healers confirmed it today. Without you, I have maybe 6 months before the curse takes me completely. With you," he met her eyes, "indefinitely." Alara stared at him. "You're saying I'm keeping you alive?" "Yes. That's not fair. I didn't ask for that." "I know, and if you want to leave, I won't stop you. But I'm asking you to stay. Not because you owe me, because I think we can help each other. Halbuza, I'll teach you to control the Lunarisma. You'll teach me how to live with the curse." He paused. "Partners." Alara looked at the cracked stone in her hands, at the fractured Shaninia running down the middle, the two halves held together by the thinnest connection. "Partners," she repeated. "Equals," Caden said. "I won't command you, I'll ask, and you can say no." No one had ever offered Alara that before. The freedom to refuse, the dignity of choice. She looked at him, at the scar on his jaw, at the exhaustion in his eyes that mirrored her own, at the way he sat with his hands open and empty, asking instead of taking. "All right," she said, "partners." Caden smiled. It was small, but it was real. "Thank you," he said. They sat in silence, side by side, with the moon overhead and the cracked stone between them, and Alara felt for the first time in 23 years that maybe, just maybe, she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The second week the training began. Commander Lyra took charge of teaching Alara to control the Lunarisma. They worked in a private courtyard, away from the curious eyes of the Stronghold's residents, and Lyra proved to be a patient, gentle teacher. "The lunar energy responds to emotion," Lyra explained, "specifically empathy. The stronger you feel someone else's pain or fear, the stronger the response." Alara nodded. "That's what happened with the rogues. I felt the pup's terror, and the light just came." "Exactly, but you can learn to summon it without needing that intensity. It's about focus." Lyra held out her hand. "Try to sense what I'm feeling right now." Alara closed her eyes, reached out with the unnamed sense that had lived behind her ribs for 23 years. She felt Lyra's steady calm, the controlled discipline of a warrior who had spent decades mastering her emotions, and beneath it a thread of something softer. Affection, pride. "You're proud of me," Alara said, uncertain. Lyra smiled. "Yes. Now hold on to that feeling. Let it fill you. And when you're ready, let it out." Alara tried. The silver light flickered at her fingertips, faint and unsteady, then faded. "Good," Lyra said. "Again." They practiced for hours. By the end of the first week, Alara could summon a steady glow that lit the courtyard like a second moon. By the end of the second week, she could focus it into a beam, a shield, a pulse that rippled outward in controlled waves. And the command voice. That came naturally. Lyra brought in a young warrior, a male wolf named Corbin, who volunteered to be the test subject. "Shift," Lyra instructed him. Corbin shifted. His wolf, a large, rust-colored beast, stood in the center of the courtyard, ears forward, waiting. "Now," Lyra said to Alara, "tell him to sit." Lyra looked at the wolf, found the place inside her chest where the command voice lived, the deep, resonant frequency that made the world stop and listen. "Sit," she said. Corbin's wolf sat, instantly, as though the command had bypassed his brain entirely and gone straight to his muscles. Lyra whistled softly. "Goddess above, do you know what you just did? Made him sit." You gave an alpha-level command, without a wolf, without rank, just pure authority. Lyra shook her head. The king was right. You're Lunarisma, true-born. Alara looked at her hands, at the faint silver glow that lingered at her fingertips. I don't feel powerful, she said. Power, Lyra said gently, isn't always loud. The third week, the bond between Alara and Caden deepened. It started small. Caden began having his feral episodes at night when the stronghold was quiet and the curse had fewer distractions to keep it at bay. The first time it happened after Alara arrived, Lyra came to her room in the middle of the night and said quietly, "The king needs you." Alara followed her to Caden's quarters. He was on the floor, shaking his eyes red, his wolf trying to claw its way out. Two healers stood at a safe distance, helpless. Alara knelt beside him, placed her hand on his chest. "Caden," she said using the command voice. "Be still. You are safe." The red faded from his eyes, the shaking stopped. The wolf settled. Caden looked at her with an expression that was half gratitude, half devastation. "I'm sorry," he said hoarsely. "I didn't want you to see me like this." "It's all right," Alara said. She did not move her hand from his chest. "I'm here." It became a routine. Every night Alara would sit with Caden for an hour before bed, her hand on his chest, grounding him, keeping the curse at bay. They did not talk much at first. But slowly in the quiet hours, with the firelight flickering and the stronghold asleep around them, they began to share. Caden told her about his father, about the 6 months of watching him waste away, about the moment the wolf went silent and the man who remained looked at Caden and said, "Don't let them make you cruel." Alara told him about Thornridge, about the supply shed and the years of silence, and the moment she realized she had been preparing to escape for 7 years without consciously deciding to. "You're brilliant," Caden said one night. "Cartography, meteorology, field medicine. You taught yourself all of that." "I had to. No one else was going to save me. You saved yourself, and then you saved 7 children, and then you saved me." He looked at her. "When do you get to rest?" Alara's throat tightened. "I don't know." "Then rest here," Caden said. "With me, with them, for as long as you want." Alara looked at him, at the honesty in his face, at the way he offered her everything and demanded nothing. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Of what?" "That this is temporary. That I'll start to believe it's real, and then it will be taken away." Caden reached out slowly, giving her time to pull back. When she didn't, he took her hand. "I can't promise nothing will ever hurt you again," he said. "But I can promise I won't be the one who does. And I can promise that as long as I'm breathing, you and those children have a home here." Alara looked at their joined hands. His palm was warm, calloused, steady. "Partners," she said. "Equals," Caden confirmed. She squeezed his hand once, then let go, but the warmth lingered. On the 18th day, the first threat arrived. A scout returned from the southern border with news. Alpha Magnus Hale had been seen in the company of 2 other alphas. Roderick Vane of Iron Peak, who controlled the richest iron mines in the territory, and Theron Stone of Stonehaven, a weapons supplier with ties to half the packs on the continent. They were recruiting. Caden summoned his war council. Alara, to the surprise of every commander in the room, was invited. "She has a right to know," Caden said when Lyra raised an eyebrow. "This is about her." The scout spread a map on the table. "They're gathering forces here at the Thornridge border. At least 200 warriors. Maybe more." "Why?" Alara asked. Her voice was steady, but her hands were clenched beneath the table. Caden looked at her. 8 months ago, I passed a law banning the exploitation of wolfless pack members. It made me unpopular in certain circles." "Circles like Magnus," Alara said. "Yes, Magnus and his allies have been profiting off wolfless labor for decades. The law cost them millions." Caden's jaw tightened. "You're not just a woman who embarrassed Magnus by surviving his exile. You're a symbol. Proof that the law was right. That wolfless wolves have value. So they want to kill me to discredit you." "Yes." Alara looked at the map, at the markers indicating enemy positions, at the routes they would likely take. She leaned forward. "May I?" Caden gestured. "Please." Alara studied the map. Then she reached for a pen and began marking routes. "Magnus will come from the south. He knows this terrain. But if you position defenders here and here, you can funnel them into this valley. It's narrow. They'll lose their numerical advantage." The commander stared at her. "How do you know this?" one of them asked. "I mapped these routes 7 years ago," Alara said simply. "I know every path, every canyon, every defensible position within 50 miles of Thornridge." Lyra leaned back in her chair and smiled. "Told you she was brilliant." Caden looked at Alara with something in his eyes that made her chest tighten. "We'll use your routes," he said. "Thank you." Alara nodded. Then, because she could not help herself, she asked, May I stay for the rest of the planning? This is a war council, one of the commanders said. She's not military. Caden's voice dropped to a register that made the stone floor vibrate. She commands me. She sits at this table as my equal. Anyone who has a problem with that can leave. No one left. Alara stayed. And when the council ended 3 hours later, she had contributed 17 strategic recommendations, 12 of which were adopted immediately. Lyra walked her back to her quarters. You impressed them. I told them what I know. You proved you belong here. Lyra paused. The king was right about you. What did he say? Lyra smiled. That you're the smartest person he's ever met, and the bravest, and that if the goddess paired him with anyone, he's glad it was you. Alara stopped walking. He said that he did. Alara looked down at the cracked river stone hanging from a cord around her neck. The two halves still connected, still whole, despite the fracture. I don't know what to do with that, she admitted. You don't have to do anything, Lyra said gently. Just let him prove it. The 19th day, Magnus's army was spotted 10 miles south. The 20th day, scouts reported they would attack within 48 hours. The 21st day, a storm rolled in from the west, exactly as Alara had predicted 72 hours earlier. They'll attack during the storm, she told Caden. Magnus is too smart to waste the cover. Caden believed her. He positioned his warriors according to Alara's defensive plan. He evacuated non-combatants to the inner keep. He sent the 7 pups to the safest room in the stronghold with Lyra's most trusted guards. And he asked Alara in the quiet of his quarters with the storm building outside, will you stay with the children where it's safe? Alara looked at him. No, Alara. I can help. The command voice works on rogues. I proved that. And the Lunarisma? She took a breath. I can protect people. Let me. Caden looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, if you're staying, you stay near me, where I can see you. Partners. Equals, Caden said. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat of him. But if something happens to you, if you get hurt because I let you fight, I will never forgive myself. Then don't let me get hurt, Alara said. Caden's hand came up slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he cupped her face, his thumb brushing her cheek. I won't, he said. I swear it. Alara leaned into the touch. Just slightly. Just enough. We face this as equals, she said. Equals, Caden agreed. The storm broke overhead, thunder shook the stronghold, and somewhere in the distance, the first war howl rose. The attack came at dawn when the storm was at its worst, and the world was the color of iron. Magnus Hale had brought 400 warriors. 200 mercenary rogues promised gold and territory for a single night's work. 200 corrupted pack wolves from Thornridge, Iron Peak, and Stonehaven, loyal to alphas who had built empires on the backs of the exploited and saw Caden's Wolfless Protection Act as a death sentence to their profit margins. They came in 3 waves. East Gate, West Wall, Southern Entrance. A coordinated assault designed to split Caden's forces and overwhelm the defenses through sheer numbers. What Magnus had not accounted for was Alara Thorne's cartography. The defenders were positioned exactly where she had marked them, archers on high ground with clear sightlines. Warriors in the narrow passes where numbers meant nothing and skill meant everything. Traps in the approach routes carefully placed to funnel the attackers into kill zones. The first wave hit the east gate like a battering ram. Caden was there at the front line, his wolf a massive black beast with eyes like winter ice. He fought with the controlled brutality of a king who had spent 11 years learning that mercy was a luxury and survival was a discipline. The rogues broke against his warriors like water against stone. The second wave hit the west wall. Commander Lyra met them with a century of the finest soldiers on the continent. The wall held. The third wave came for the southern entrance. And Alara was waiting. She stood in the center of the courtyard 50 yards from the gate with the cracked river stone hanging from her neck and her hands open and empty. Behind her, the inner keep rose like a fortress within a fortress, and behind those walls, 7 children huddled in the safest room in the stronghold, waiting for their mother to come back. Alara would not let anyone pass this courtyard. The southern gate exploded inward. 50 rogues poured through the breach, feral-eyed and foam-mouthed, driven by gold and bloodlust in equal measure. They saw a single woman, small and unarmed, standing between them and the keep. They grinned. The first rogue, a massive, brindled wolf with scars across his muzzle, lunged. Alara opened her mouth and said one word, "Stop." The command voice hit like a shockwave. 50 rogues froze mid-stride. Paws skidded on stone. Momentum died. They stood locked in place, muscles straining, eyes wide with confusion and something that looked almost like fear. Alara stepped forward. The silver light began to build at her fingertips, spreading up her arms across her chest, pouring from her skin like moonlight made manifest. "Kneel," she said. 50 rogues collapsed to the ground. Not slowly, not reluctantly. Their legs folded beneath them as though the command had bypassed their brains entirely and rewritten the code of their bodies. The defenders on the wall stared. Commander Lyra, fighting at the west wall, heard the sudden silence from the south and turned. She saw the silver light rising from the courtyard like a pillar reaching for the sky. "Goddess above," she breathed. Elara raised her hands. The lunarisma responded, flooding outward in a wave that covered the entire courtyard. Where it touched the defenders on the walls, their wounds began to close. Exhaustion faded. Strength returned. Where it touched the rogues, they could not move, could not shift. Their wolves, pressed against the surface of their skin, found themselves locked behind bars of pure lunar energy. "Sleep," Elara said. 50 rogues collapsed into unconsciousness. The southern courtyard was silent. Elara stood in the center of a circle of bodies, breathing hard, the silver light slowly fading from her skin. She had not killed a single one. She had simply removed them from the battle. Mercy even in war. Behind her, the keep doors opened. Lysander, disobeying orders to stay inside, stood in the doorway with his mouth open. "Mama," he whispered, "you're glowing." Elara turned, saw him. Her heart clenched. "Get back inside," she said, her voice rough. "It's not over yet." But at the east gate, something had gone wrong. Kaidan was winning. The rogues at the east gate were breaking, falling back under the disciplined assault of his warriors. Victory was minutes away. And then the curse rose. It came without warning. One moment, Kaidan was fighting with the cold precision of a king who had mastered every aspect of his wolf. The next, his vision flooded red. The feral thing inside him, the silver-poisoned beast that had been waiting 11 years for this moment, surged forward and tore through his control like paper. Kaidan's wolf stopped distinguishing between enemy and ally. The warrior to his left, a young male named Darren, took a claw across the chest. The female to his right barely dodged a slash that would have taken her head off. "My king," someone shouted. "The curse, get back!" But Kaidan could not hear them, could not see them. There was only red and rage and the overwhelming need to kill everything that moved. Commander Lyra at the west wall heard the commotion, heard the screams. She turned and saw Kaidan fully shifted, attacking his own warriors. "No," she breathed. "Not now, not here." She looked toward the southern courtyard where the silver light had just faded. "Elara!" she shouted. "The king, Elara heard." She did not think, did not hesitate. She ran, across the courtyard through the eastern passage toward the sounds of chaos and the smell of blood. Her bare feet slapped against stone. Her lungs burned. The cracked river stone bounced against her chest with every step. She emerged at the east gate and saw him. Kaidan in full wolf form, massive and black and beautiful and completely out of control. His warriors had fallen back, forming a circle around him, trying to contain him without hurting him, trying not to die. Kaidan's wolf lunged at a warrior named Marcus, jaws open, killing blow. Elara did not have time to reach him, did not have time to get close enough to touch, so she used the only weapon she had, her voice. Kaidan Blackwell. The command voice tore from her throat with a force that made the air vibrate. It was not a request, not a suggestion. It was a fundamental rewriting of reality, a statement of absolute law delivered in a tone that bypassed the feral curse entirely and went straight to the core of who Kaidan was beneath the silver and the rage. "Be still, know me." Kaidan's wolf froze. Mid-lunge, jaws inches from Marcus's throat, frozen as though someone had stopped time itself. The red faded from his eyes. The wolf looked at Elara. Recognition flickered. Kaidan's human consciousness buried beneath the curse surfaced just enough to understand. He shifted. Human form, naked, shaking. He collapsed to his knees on the blood-slicked stones of the courtyard. Elara ran to him, dropped to her knees beside him, placed both hands on his chest. "I'm here," she said. Quieter now, gentle. "You're safe. I'm here." Kaidan looked at her with eyes that were clear and gray and devastated. "I could have killed them," he said. His voice was hoarse, broken. "I could have killed you, but you didn't, because you stopped me." "Yes." Kaidan's hands came up to cover hers where they pressed against his chest. "I can't do this without you. If you hadn't been here." "I was here," Elara said firmly, "and I will be here every time, for as long as you need me." "That's not fair to you." "I don't care about fair. I care about you." The words hung in the air between them. Kaidan stared at her, at the small, fierce woman with the cracked stone and the command voice who had just saved his life in front of his assembled court. "Elara." A war horn sounded. The west wall, Magnus's forces seeing the east gate falter and the south gate silent, had concentrated everything on the west. Lyra's voice carried across the stronghold. All defenders to the west wall. They're breaking through, Caden stood. Someone threw him a cloak. He wrapped it around himself and looked at Alara. Can you do what you did at the south gate again? Yes. Then come with me. They ran. The west wall was chaos. 200 rogues and corrupted pack wolves had concentrated their assault on a single 50-yard section. The defenders were holding but barely. Blood slicked the stones. Bodies, wolf and human alike, lay broken at the base of the wall. And in the center of the enemy forces, directing the assault with cold precision, was Alpha Magnus Hale. Caden saw him, felt his wolf surge. But this time Alara's hand was on his arm, grounding him, and the curse stayed quiet. I need to get close, Alara said. The Lunarisma has a range limit, maybe 100 yards. I'll get you close. Caden shifted. His wolf, enormous and black, crouched low. Alara understood. She climbed onto his back, wrapped her hands in his fur, and held on. Caden ran, straight into the heart of the enemy forces. Rogues lunged. Caden tore through them. A corrupted pack wolf blocked their path. Caden's jaws closed around the wolf's throat. One shake. The wolf fell. 50 yards from Magnus. 40. 30. Alara could feel the Lunarisma building inside her, not the controlled focus power she had learned in training. This was the battle surge. The goddess's wrath channeled through a mortal vessel. 20 yards. Magnus saw them. His eyes widened. He shouted something to his warriors, but the words were lost in the storm, and the screaming and the sound of Caden's paws hitting stone. 10 yards. Alara let go. She slid from Caden's back, hit the ground running, and raised her hands. The silver light erupted. It did not spread slowly this time. It detonated, a sphere of pure lunar energy 100 yards in diameter, centered on Alara and expanding outward at the speed of thought. Where it touched Caden's warriors, their wounds healed. Their strength returned. Their wolves, tired and bloodied, found themselves renewed. Where it touched Magnus's forces, they froze. 200 rogues and corrupted wolves caught mid-attack, locked in place by power that predated their existence and answered to laws they could not break. Magnus himself shifted into a massive gray wolf, stood frozen 10 feet from Alara. His eyes were wide. His lips were pulled back from his teeth in a snarl that would never complete. Alara stepped forward. The silver light poured from her skin like water. Her eyes were pure lunar silver. Her voice, when she spoke, carried harmonics that were not quite human. You came to harm children, she said. You chose darkness. The moon sees all. The moon judges all. She raised one hand. Magnus's wolf, along with the 6 other alphas and betas who had led this assault, lifted into the air. Telekinesis. Pure will made manifest. You will face justice, Alara said. Not in darkness, in light, where everyone can see. She gestured. The suspended wolves flew backward away from the wall and landed in a heap 50 yards distant, alive, conscious, but unable to move. The remaining rogues, seeing their leaders defeated, broke. They ran. Alara let them go. She had no interest in slaughter, only in protection. The silver light faded. Alara collapsed to her knees, breathing hard. The riverstone hanging from her neck had split completely. The two halves separated, connected now only by the leather cord. Caden shifted to human form. Someone handed him another cloak. He draped it over his shoulders and walked to Alara. He knelt beside her. Are you hurt? No, tired. You just won a war. Alara looked at the 7 suspended wolves in the distance. At Magnus, frozen in place, his gray eyes filled with impotent rage. No, she said. Now comes the hard part. They held Magnus and his allies in silver-lined cells beneath the stronghold. The silver weakened their wolves, made escape possible, gave the defenders time to breathe and plan. Caden sent messengers immediately, not to nearby packs, to the Continental Alliance. The Alliance was the highest authority in the North American wolf territories. 12 alphas, one from each major region, who convened only for matters of continental importance. Treason, war crimes, crimes against the goddess herself. The message Caden sent was simple. Formal trial requested for crimes against Divine Chosen. All Alliance judges summoned to bear witness. It took 2 weeks for the judges to arrive, 2 weeks during which Caden's scholars gathered evidence. Financial ledgers seized from Thornridge and Iron Peak, showing the $4.2 million in annual profit from wolfless labor. Intercepted letters between Magnus and his co-conspirators, detailing plans to overthrow Caden and repeal the Wolfless Protection Act. Testimony from 42 wolfless survivors across 6 territories, each one documenting years of abuse, and one piece of evidence that no one had expected. On the 3rd day after the battle, Briar came to Alara with the lockbox. I'm ready now, she said quietly. Inside was a document. It was dated 3 years earlier. The header read, Weak Bloodline Elimination Protocol, Council Consensus. Beneath that header were 217 names. wolves marked for removal, families designated as expendable, children listed for elimination before they could dilute the pack's strength. Among those names, the parents of all 7 pups. The rogues had not killed their families. Magnus and his council had ordered their execution. When Alara read the documents sitting in Caden's study with Lyra and the head scholar, her hands shook so badly she had to set it down. He didn't just exile the weak, she said quietly. He hunted them. Yes, Caden said. His voice was granite. For profit. Yes, Alara looked at him. I want to testify. You will. The trial began on the morning of the 15th day. The great hall had been transformed. 13 thrones arranged in a semicircle. Caden's throne in the center recused from judgment due to conflict of interest but present as host and witness. 12 alliance judges flanking him, 6 to each side. Alphas from across the continent, each one representing a territory and bringing with them the weight of centuries of wolf law. 800 witnesses packed the hall, standing room only. Warriors and civilians alike drawn by the promise of justice or spectacle, or simply the historic nature of what was about to happen. This was the largest assembly in 50 years. Magnus and his 6 co-conspirators were brought in chains, silver chains which burned their skin and weakened their wolves and marked them as prisoners awaiting judgment. The Chief Justice of the Alliance, an elderly female alpha named Miriam Ashwood, 70 years old and sharp as a blade, called the hall to order. We are convened, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the massive space, to hear charges against Alpha Magnus Hale of Thornridge, Alpha Roderick Vane of Iron Peak Alpha, Theron Stone of Stonehaven Beta, Silas Crane of Thornridge, and 3 enforcers complicit in crimes against the Goddesses Chosen and against the Continental Wolfless Protection Act. She paused. Let the weight of those words settle. The charges are as follows. Systematic exploitation of wolfless pack members for economic gain. Conspiracy to murder a divine chosen. Attempted coup against a sitting alpha king. And murder of 63 wolfless individuals over a 10-year period. The hall was silent. How did the accused plead? Magnus, still in chains, raised his chin. Not guilty. The other 6 echoed him. Chief Justice Ashwood nodded. Then let the evidence be presented. The first phase of the trial lasted 2 hours. Caden's scholars laid out the financial records on tables for all to see. Ledgers showing $4.2 million per year in profit. Payment records to mercenaries $500,000 for a single night's attack. Resource extraction logs detailing the iron timber and trade goods harvested by unpaid wolfless labor. Physical evidence followed. The intercepted letters read aloud by a court scribe, each one signed by Magnus or one of his co-conspirators. The tracking collars found on the bodies of executed wolfless, marked with serial numbers that corresponded to entries in Magnus's personal logs. And then the document from Briar's lockbox, the weak bloodline elimination protocol. When the scribe read the header aloud, a ripple of shock ran through the hall. When he read the first 10 names, gasps. When he reached name 100, someone in the crowd began to weep. When he finished all 217, the silence was absolute. Chief Justice Ashwood looked at Magnus. This document bears your signature. Do you deny it? Magnus's jaw worked. Those families were weak. They were diluting our bloodlines. It was a necessary. That is not a denial, Ashwood interrupted. Do you deny signing this document? Silence. Answer the question, Alpha Hale. No, Magnus said finally. I do not deny it. The hall erupted. Ashwood raised her hand. Silence returned, but it was fragile now, a thin skin over boiling rage. We will hear witness testimony, she said. The first witness was an elderly male wolf named Garrett, 63 years old, who had worked Magnus's iron mines for 40 years without pay. He walked to the stand, slowly leaning on a cane. His hands shook. His voice when he spoke was thin and reedy, but it carried. I worked the mines from the time I was 19, he said. My daughter Sarah was wolfless. When she was 16, she complained about the conditions. Magnus told me that if she spoke again, she would be removed. Removed meaning what? Ashwood asked. Killed, Garrett said simply. She didn't speak again. 2 years later, she was found dead in her quarters. They said it was suicide. She was 19 years old. He looked at Magnus. I believed you, he said. When you said the weak had to serve the strong, I believed you. I thought it was the way things had to be. I was wrong. My daughter was not weak. She was murdered. And I want the world to know her name. Sarah Garrett. She mattered. The hall was silent. The second witness was Alpha Theron Stone. He had been offered a deal. Full testimony in exchange for reduced sentencing. He had taken it. Theron walked to the stand with his head bowed. He did not look at Magnus. I joined the council for profit, he said. I knew we were exploiting wolfless labor. I told myself it was tradition, old ways. I voted with Magnus on every policy for 8 years, including the elimination protocol, Ashwood asked. Theron's voice cracked. I voted against it, 5-1. I was the one. When I saw what Magnus intended, I tried to leave. He threatened my family. I stayed. I'm a coward, but I will speak the truth now. He detailed the conspiracy, specific meetings, vote tallies, financial distributions. The plan to attack Ashcroft during the storm and kill Alara publicly to discredit Kaidan's reforms. By the time he finished, 2 of the judges were taking notes. The rest were staring at Magnus with expressions of cold fury. The third witness was Alara. She walked to the stand in a simple gray dress with the cracked riverstone hanging from her neck. The 2 halves separated now, each one held by the leather cord like a broken promise trying to remain whole. The hall fell silent. Ashwood looked at her gently. Please state your name for the record. Alara Thorne. And you are wolfless. Yes. Describe your life in Thornridge Pack. Alara took a breath. She had prepared for this, had practiced with Kaidan and Lyra. But standing here in front of 800 witnesses with Magnus 10 feet away in chains, the words felt harder than she had expected. I was named Hollow when I turned 16, she said. It meant worthless. I lived in a supply shed for 7 years. I ate kitchen scraps. I worked without pay. When I protested, I was reminded that I had no standing, no voice, no right to exist beyond what the pack allowed me. Did Alpha Hale himself abuse you? Yes, not with his hands, with his silence. He created a system where I was less than nothing, and he profited from it. Ashwood nodded. We have a document here. The financial ledger seized from Thornridge. It lists your name. Can you read the entry for us? Alara took the ledger, found her name. Her voice did not shake. Alara Thorne. Wolfless. Labor classification general maintenance. Annual output value $14,000. Notes compliant useful for tasks requiring manual dexterity. She set the ledger down. I was worth $14,000 a year, she said quietly, and I never saw a single coin. Ashwood leaned forward. You found 7 pups in the wilderness. Orphans. Their parents listed in the elimination protocol. You chose to protect them despite pack law forbidding it. Why? Because they were children, Alara said, and someone had to. You were exiled for this. Yes. And during that exile, you discovered your lunarisma. Yes. Ashwood's eyes were kind. The Alliance has reviewed the evidence. 9 rogue bodies, scorched earth, witness testimony from the Alpha King's warriors. You defended yourself and 7 children against 12 attackers and killed 9 of them. Is that correct? Yes. The law is clear. Killing in defense of self or innocence is justified. But I want to ask you something else. Ashwood paused. You had the power to kill all 12. Why did you spare 3? Alara looked at Magnus, then back at Ashwood. Because killing should never be easy, she said. And because the 3 I spared had stopped fighting. They ran. I let them. Mercy even in battle. Yes. Ashwood nodded slowly. One more question. The council sitting in judgment today needs to understand the full scope of what was done to wolfless pack members. Can you read the names? Alara's stomach dropped. The names, the 63 wolfless wolves who were killed under Magnus's rule. Their names are in the ledger. I would like you to read them aloud, so that everyone in this hall hears, so that they are remembered. Alara's hands shook. She took the ledger. She read, Sarah Garrett, age 19, Marcus Thorne, age 23, Eliza Blackwood, age 17, James River, age 31. The names went on, young and old, male and female. Some she recognized from her years in Thornridge. Most she did not because they had been erased so thoroughly that even their deaths left no mark. It took 3 minutes to read all 63. When she finished, her voice was hoarse and her face was wet with tears she had not felt falling. The hall was silent. Then from the back, someone stood. A warrior. He placed his fist over his heart in the gesture of respect. Another stood, then another. Within seconds, 800 wolves were on their feet. For 63 dead, for Alara, for the truth finally spoken. Ashwood let it continue for a full minute. Then she raised her hand. The hall sat. Thank you, Alara Thorne, she said. You may step down. Alara walked back to her seat beside Kaidan. He took her hand and squeezed it once. She did not let go. The 4th witness was Lysander. He was 5 years old. He walked to the stand holding Lyra's hand, and when he climbed into the chair, his feet did not touch the ground. Ashwood's voice was infinitely gentle. Hello, Lysander. Do you know why you're here? To tell the truth, Lysander said. His voice was small but clear. That's right. Can you tell us what happened to your parents? Lysander looked at Magnus. The bad men killed them. They came at night. They said our family was weak. Mama told us to run. We ran. She didn't. And then Mama Alara found us. In the barn, she made us safe. Mama Alara, Lysander pointed at Alara. She's not hollow. She's full of light. He climbed down from the chair, ran to Alara, climbed into her lap. No one stopped him. Ashwood looked at Magnus. Do you have anything to say in your defense? Magnus stood. I followed the old ways, strength over weakness, pack over individual. The wolfless are, Caden's voice cut through the hall like a blade. Say their names, Magnus stopped. What? The 63 you killed. Say their names, prove they were wolves, not numbers. Silence. You cannot, Caden said, because you never saw them, you never knew them. That is the crime. Magnus sat down. The 12 judges conferred for 10 minutes. Then Chief Justice Ashwood stood. We have reached a verdict, she said. The hall held its breath. On the charge of systematic exploitation, guilty. All defendants. On the charge of conspiracy to murder divine chosen, guilty. All defendants. On the charge of attempted coup, guilty. Magnus Hale Roderick Vane Silas Crane. On the charge of murder, guilty. Magnus Hale Roderick Vane Silas Crane. She paused. Sentencing is as follows. The council conspiracy is hereby dissolved. Alpha Magnus Hale, Alpha Roderick Vane, and Beta Silas Crane stripped of all titles and exiled to the wastes for the remainder of their natural lives. All assets are forfeit. Alpha Theron Stone, in recognition of testimony and cooperation, is sentenced to 10 years supervised probation and forfeiture of assets. The 3 enforcers 5 years exile each. She looked at Magnus. Your bloodline is barred from Alpha succession for 3 generations. Thornridge Pack is dissolved. Members may petition to join other packs or form new governance under elected leadership. All seized assets totaling $8.7 million will fund the establishment of a continental wolfless sanctuary and reparations to survivors. She raised her voice. Furthermore, the Continental Alliance hereby ratifies the Wolfless Protection Act as continental law. Exploitation of non-shifting wolves is now treason across all territories. This law is effective immediately and will be enforced by Alliance authority. The hall erupted. Not in chaos, in justice. Magnus was dragged away. He did not beg, did not apologize. But the look he gave Alara as he passed was empty, hollow. Alara met his eyes, said nothing. She did not need to. The goddess had spoken. 1 week later, Caden asked Alara to marry him, not in the Great Hall, not in front of witnesses. In the garden on the stone wall where they had spent so many evenings talking with the moon overhead and the cracked river stone between them. I know it's soon, he said. I know you might not be ready, but I need you to know that I'm not asking because of the bond. I'm asking because you make me want to be better, because you see the worst parts of me and you stay anyway, because when I imagine the future, you're in it, always. He took her hands. Alara Thorne. Will you be my mate, my queen, my equal partner in all things? Alara looked at the cracked stone, at the 2 separated halves that she had carried for so long. I was broken, she said. You showed me that broken can still be whole. Yes, 1,000 times yes. The ceremony was held under the full moon. 3,000 witnesses. Caden and Alara stood in the center of the clearing where the pack ran together and they exchanged the bite that would bind them for life. When Caden marked her shoulder, his wolf gentle, despite the power behind it, silver light flared. When Alara marked his shoulder, the first time a human had ever marked an Alpha King, gold light answered. The 2 lights braided together. Visible. Undeniable. The bond complete. Ash, who had been chosen to carry the Riverstone pieces down the aisle on a silk cushion, watched with wide eyes. After the ceremony, Alara took the 2 halves of the stone. She had them set in silver embedded in the crown she would wear as Luna Queen, the fracture line visible. The 2 pieces held together not by stone but by the setting around them. Why not repair it? Caden asked. Because it's not broken, Alara said. It's complete. 6 months later, the world looked different. The Continental Wolfless Sanctuary opened in the Montana Rockies. A sprawling complex of training facilities, dormitories, and healing centers, co-directed by Alara and Commander Lyra. 200 residents in the first month. Wolfless wolves from across the continent coming to learn that they were not hollow, not weak, not worthless. 3 of them showed signs of lunarisma potential. Diluted but teachable. The Wolfless Protection Act was enforced. 3 territories underwent complete leadership changes. Former wolfless wolves were elected to alpha positions in 2 packs. The old guard, the ones who had profited from exploitation, found themselves facing audits and investigations and in several cases exile. Alpha Theron, Stone, the Council's sole turncoat, served his 10-year probation rebuilding Stonehaven under Alliance oversight. He would never hold power again, but his testimony had saved lives. That, Alara thought, was its own kind of justice. Thornridge was renamed Thornridge Renewal. The pack under new elected leadership built a memorial wall in the center of the territory. 63 names carved in stone, with a plaque that read, "They were not weak, they were murdered." We remember, the word hollow, once a slur, became an honored title, given to those who protected the vulnerable, who stood between darkness and innocence, who proved that the goddess's gifts came in unexpected forms. The 7 children thrived. Briar, now 5, trained with the sanctuary's youngest warriors. She was fierce, protective, and utterly devoted to her younger siblings. Lysander, now 6, became the official pack tracker, the youngest ever. His gift for following scent trails was unmatched. Eloan and Caspian studied healing arts, their gentle hands and sharp minds perfectly suited to the work. Beck and Sage found their wolves within the first month of safety. They shifted together, small and ungainly, and luminous with joy. And Ash. Ash, now 4 years old, shifted for the first time on the 6-month anniversary of the trial. It happened in the garden. Alara was sitting on the stone wall, her hand on her stomach where twins grew, a boy and a girl, when Ash came running. "Mama, Mama, watch," he shifted. His wolf was small, silver-furred, with eyes the exact shade of Alara's Lunarisma. Alara wept. Caden, standing nearby, wrapped his arms around her. "He's perfect." "They're all perfect," Alara said. The formal adoption ceremony happened the next week. All 7 children, legally bound to Caden and Alara as their own. The celebration lasted 3 days. Alara was crowned Luna Queen. Not consort, co-ruler. The crown Caden placed on her head was silver, set with the 2 pieces of her cracked riverstone, the fracture line visible to anyone who looked. "Broken but held together," Caden said. "Broken but complete," Alara corrected. She was 4 months pregnant, healthy, glowing, no longer the hollow-eyed shadow who had walked out of Thornridge with 7 children and a rusted knife. She was home. The final full moon ceremony of the year drew 3,000 wolves to the clearing. Alara, as Luna Queen, led the ritual. She stood in the center of the clearing, the same spot where she had once stood, barefoot and bleeding, and she raised her voice. "6 months ago, I stood in a courtyard and read 63 names. Wolves who were killed because someone decided they were worthless. I was almost one of those names. I was called Hollow. Worthless." She paused. Let the words settle. We are what the goddess sees in us. Not our absences, but our purposes. Every wolfless person is a reminder of what we value. Power or love, strength or compassion, tradition or growth. She looked at the crowd, at warriors and healers and children and elders, all of them watching her. Tonight we howl not just for the moon, we howl for every soul the world tried to diminish, for every heart that refused to break, for the truth that strength is not always loud and power is not always visible, and the hollow places are where the light gets in. Caden began the howl, deep, resonant. The call of an alpha king who had learned that ruling was not about being the strongest, but about being the one people trusted to make the hard choices. 3,000 wolves joined him. The sound rose like a tide, like a wave, like the voice of the earth remembering its own name. Alara did not howl. She hummed. The sound was small at first, the same low vibration she had used to calm 7 terrified pups in a barn. But as the moonlight intensified, the hum expanded. It wove through the wolves, howling like silver thread through dark cloth. It rose and deepened and became something that was not a howl and not a song, but a third thing. The voice of the Lunarisma, the sound the moon makes when it loves the world. The 7 children joined, 7 young voices, pure and clear. Ash's first howl, tiny and precious, and exactly right. The sound filled the clearing, filled the forest, filled the night. And when it finally faded, when the last echo died away, the pack stood in silence under the moon and understood that they had witnessed something sacred. Alara stepped down from the center of the clearing. Caden met her halfway. They walked together to where the children waited, and all 9 of them sat in a circle on the grass. Ash climbed into Alara's lap. "Mama, will you fix the stone now?" Alara lifted the crown from her head, showed him the 2 pieces held in their silver setting, the fracture line visible. "No, love," she said. "It's not broken." "How come?" Alara touched the fracture line. "Because the cracks let the light through." Ash studied the stone. Then he looked at Alara, at the scars on her arms, at the way she held herself like someone who had been broken and rebuilt and was stronger for it. "You're not hollow, Mama," he said. "No," Alara agreed. She looked at Caden, at the 7 children. At the stronghold in the distance, lights glowing warm. at the clearing filled with wolves who had witnessed justice and chosen mercy. "I'm home," she said. The moon watched. The stone pulsed. Somewhere in the distance, a nightbird called, a clean, carrying note that hung in the air like a benediction. The ancient oaks creaked in a wind that smelled of pine and damp earth and the first green stirrings of spring. Elara Thorne, who had spent 23 years waiting for a wolf that would never come, sat surrounded by her family under a sky full of stars and understood. She had not been waiting for a wolf. She had been waiting for this. For purpose. For family. For the courage to be beautifully, luminously broken. The goddess does not make mistakes. She makes miracles. And sometimes the greatest miracle is not the power to destroy, but the power to protect. Not the strength to fight, but the strength to love. Not the ability to be whole, but the courage to be complete.